It's the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thanks for being here with us. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi again, Alain.
Hi, everyone.
Joining us this week from the Reason Foundation in Washington is Marc Scribner, Senior Transportation Policy Analyst at the Foundation. Thanks, Marc. Great to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great having you.
For listeners who may not be up on the Reason Foundation, maybe you can start out with a little bit of background for us.
Yeah, so the Reason Foundation, it's been around since the 1970s, and it has two major divisions. One is the magazine, Reason Magazine, which the foundation is named after, but it also has a public policy think tank, and that's what the founder of the foundation, Bob Poole, he is also the director of transportation policy there, so he has had a long career in transportation policy going back several decades now, and he's been a forward-looking thinker on things like tolling, popularizing the concept of HOT lanes, trying to slowly bring us into the 21st century. So I joined Reason in April of this year. So I'm happy to be there and excited to keep Reason's mission moving forward on bringing us slowly into the 21st century.
Yikes, joining in April. You've never seen The Office, have you?
I have not actually.
Well, you've written
No comment on that. I mean, it must be, yeah, whatever.
Well, the reason we have you here is you've written a policy brief published this week headlined 10 Best Practices for State Automated Vehicle Policy. And you call the recommendations no regrets policies that states can undertake with minimal risk for automated vehicle development or the public interest. Give us a little overview here of what the article contains.
Well, like the title says, there are 10 recommendations in there, but that's about a third of the report. The other 2/3, there's about a third where I spend talking about what is an automated vehicle, because that's still confusing a lot of policymakers. At
extremely confusing, if I may. Well, I think it's extremely confusing to everybody, unfortunately. But go ahead.
I think that's right, Alan. And right now, for better or for worse, we have SAE International's recommended practice J3016, and I spend about 10 pages explaining what that means and why it should matter to policymakers. I'm hopeful that the efforts that are underway at groups like PAVE or AAA to actually come up with consumer-friendly language bear fruit in the near term. So hopefully we don't have to spend 10 pages explaining what we mean by the various levels of automation. But I think, having that common vocabulary, and that's the first recommendation I make for state policymakers, is adopt a standard vocabulary. I think that's critically important, because if we're not speaking the same language, we're just going to be talking past each other, and that does not bode well for policymaking on these issues. But then the other third of the paper.
Could we pause just a second on that? Because to me that is so darn important, as it is to you. You put it out there in front. I mean, how did we get to this point? How did we call them levels in the first place? I mean, because nobody could use proper words in the English language, we decided to pick out levels. I mean, color. I mean, it really there's no context to be put in that, except the only context may be that there's a possible evolution through this thing, which there probably isn't even that associated with this technology. There probably, if you're going out for one of the things, you better be going down one road. If you're going out for another one, you're probably going down another road. I hate to use the road cliche. This deserves a couple more minutes of our time, I think.
And I think you're getting at something there, Alan, where I think that is a valid criticism. The fact that we have the 1 through 5 driving automation systems, and then 3 through 5 automated driving systems. I think that has been a source of confusion, because we're really talking about, when we're talking about lower levels of automation and higher levels of automation, we're talking about really different things. So I think that
and probably different objectives too, because
absolutely
suggests that in fact the more automation we have, the safer we're going to be. That may not necessarily, in fact, be true. I mean, you can get a heck of a lot of safety, I argue, by properly putting the human in a loop, but you can't get much mobility for those who don't have the wherewithals to be in that loop. And so, if you're trying to provide mobility to those who don't have the wherewithals in that loop, to me, they're so fundamentally different that it's kind of a shame, and people confuse them one way or another. They want to do something for one, and they end up trying to talk to me here, Mark.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. And this problem has been, in the aviation context, when we're talking about autopilot, this has been a huge debate for decades now. And we're just now starting to get there with automobiles, with ground vehicles. And I think that that's part of the problem, is that we're still in a relatively early stage.
We are. We're at zero still. I mean, we haven't even really started yet.
You mentioned autopilot, and you can talk cruise control too. Means different things in different vehicles. Do we need automakers on board in standardizing terminology too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the AAA report, where they came up with all the dozens of different terms used for adaptive cruise control and things. I mean, that's a problem. I mean, we should standardize terminology in both the government context and in the commercial context. And I think what Alan was speaking to, some of the things like where we're talking about, like the federal government has confused this. Like one of NHTSA's guidance documents on this improperly was referring to vehicles rather than the automation system, which they then had to correct. So this is confusing the regulators, or the people who were expecting to someday regulate this technology. So yeah, I mean, we're in a difficult situation right now because we really have, the dominant standard is J3016. But I hope that we can come to some clearer, more especially consumer-friendly technology, just so we can have these conversations that we're going to need to have over the coming years, rather than, like I said, going back and writing 10 pages trying to explain what J3016 should mean to people.
Well, there is much more in the report that you came out with. Why don't you touch on some of the other areas?
Yeah, I don't want to necessarily go through all 10, but I think, like I said, I think the number one thing is adopt the standard vocabulary. And then I think respecting the competencies at various levels of government is also very important. We've heard a lot in recent years coming out of state departments of transportation, state legislators, and some states have gotten further than others. California has gone quite far in the regulation of this technology. And I think the problem is that, state DMVs are not well equipped to do vehicle safety and performance regulations. Expecting to turn every state DMV into a mini NHTSA, I think, is a recipe for disaster. And that, unfortunately, is where we're seeing some states try to go. They're trying to do too much. But it's not entirely their fault, because the federal government hasn't taken action on a lot of these things that it ought to. And that gets to, that's another thing. I think we're in a very unsatisfying stage right now, because things like technical standards and standardized test procedures, the kinds of things that the federal government, that NHTSA would want to be able to write regulations that incorporate those standards and test procedures, they don't exist yet. So we're at this, telling a politician or a regulator that we don't have the information to do a lot of the stuff that they would like to be able to do just isn't very satisfying to them. And that's kind of where we are right now. We're kind of in this limbo stage between the published technical standards and regulation, and no one really likes it from the policy setting. But my recommendation is, states and local governments shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel. They have experience in various aspects of motor vehicle regulation, and they should stick to those. As unsatisfying as that may sound to a state legislator who wants to have a quote unquote vision test for an autonomous vehicle, or whatever we're calling them, that's just not something that your state DMV is very equipped to do. So that's a recommendation that I think is very important. And then I think another one.
I think if I
go ahead
a little bit on that one, I think that's exceedingly important. The realization that one doesn't even know what tests to run necessarily. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so because we're still at zero. Okay, we may not have enough of the corner cases. We may not have enough of the performance things, and of course, the fundamental fear with that is if you're too risk averse on this thing, then you end up not getting anything out of it. Okay, stay home. Okay, I mean, you want to be safe. Stay home. Hopefully your house won't get hit by a meteorite, or there won't be a fire outside to engulf it, or or whatever, or the other sorts of things. But stay home, which is not what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve mobility for individuals. Why? Because it improves our quality of life without unnecessarily taking risks. Okay, so one of the issues that I sort of on the safety piece. Does one look for the regulation? In other words, if I'm a manufacturer, am I really looking for the regulations to be established by NHTSA or somebody else? And so that I know which box that I need to check. Once I check all those boxes, then I can go out and sell it and do whatever I need to be in business. And then if something bad happens, I'll say, hey, NHTSA, you said I could do it because I checked all your boxes. You pick up the tab. Is that where the regulation should go? Or, who ends up being responsible? I know that one can set guidelines associated with these things, but, what would one like to get to on this safety business?
Yeah, and liability is an important issue, and one that I purposefully did not address in this report, because I don't know and I don't think anyone knows what the right answer there is yet. Now,
and I certainly don't. So I mean, I'm not even suggesting I do. Okay.
Now, a state legislature, which the states have responsibility for liability determination, insurance requirements, things of that nature. They could set a liability rule that's designed to specifically address these issues. However, they could also, liability, like this is judge-made law.
Right. Of course,
in
yes.
many cases. So we've got, letting the law develop through organically. That might be the way to go. And we've seen in other products liability circumstances, the products liability law is happy to evolve around new products. Now, we may not like the outcome that courts arrive at, and maybe then that's when a legislature may take corrective action. But I don't think we're there yet. But you're right. It's already raising practical issues. I mean, with the so-called level 3 kind of highway pilot style ADSs, those aren't on the market because according to the developers, they don't trust releasing that tech out in the wild to people where, I think,
Yeah, because if things go south on that thing, who's responsible? And if I'm whatevering, doing, and this thing's working and it goes south, then I'm going to say, hey, yo, it's you guys. And are they willing to then stand up and say, yes, it was us. We're picking up the tab.
Right. And it may be why we may never see this technology, higher levels of automation beyond the kind of level 2 stuff that's out there right now. We may never see that sold to individual consumers. Now, I don't think that that necessarily forecloses a market for personal vehicles. But I think with all the data that's going to be generated in this and all the heightened foreseeability that these companies will have, knowing how that technology can be misused or et cetera, they're going to want to have, if they do let it out in a personal vehicle concept, it may be through lease agreements with very strict terms where they can see exactly how you're using that vehicle, that you're maintaining it adequately, that your sensors aren't malfunctioning or blocked by debris, some things like that. So that may be the future. It may not be you go plop down your credit card at a dealer and drive off with something you just purchased. You may be.
What are your credit limits, Mark? What do you mean? You mean you can go down there with your credit card? Oh my goodness, man!
Yeah, not my credit card.
No, but I get what you're saying. That it's a whole different ball game there. As to who's maintaining, who's really responsible, and of course, I maintain all my vehicles according to the specs of what. I mean, of course, yeah.
Mark, this week the SelfDrive Act got another push in Congress. Any thoughts about that? Is that the kind of thing you're looking for?
Well, the SelfDrive Act, when it was introduced previously, I thought it was a good first start, but I mean, the reintroduction this week, I don't think it has no chance of going anywhere. It was sort of panned by the people you need the support of, and somehow, even though this was just a messaging bill and everyone kind of knew it, they managed to get the AFL-CIO off the sidelines and come out opposed to it. So, I think it was a mistake to introduce this, but so Congress is likely going to have to hit the reset button next Congress. And I hope if they do that, they start thinking about what are the sort of the core issues where we know we have enough information to actually develop policy, which isn't on that much, and focus on those rather than try to dream up how these cars are going to be used 20 years from now if they're out there and ubiquitous, and a lot of the kind of stuff that seems to occupy a lot of the policy debate, but those are areas where we have very little hard information.
With respect to that idea, I mean, if we look at the other modes of transportation from their inception to their, beginning in the market and so on, and then where legislation came in, the regulations, the legislation, the public oversight always seemed to take a while, or did take a while before it jumped in there in any of these things. Do I have the right concept on that? I mean, even with railroads, or even with electric traction, with airplanes, with whatever. I mean, the Civil Aeronautics Act, or whatever it was called, it was in like 1929 or something like that. Wright brothers, or 1903. I mean, I think, I sort of equate the DARPA Challenges 2005 to Wright brothers 1903 type of thing as a start of the real start. Not that people hadn't looked at it before. People looked at flight a long time before the Wright brothers. Thoughts on your end on that one? And we still way too early, I guess, is my question.
I think that's right. I mean, and you go back in the early history of aviation, you had a lot of people saying we're not going to have passenger airlines because they were falling out of the sky all the time.
Of course they were.
And that,
they barely, went up in the sky, right?
Yeah, right. They didn't spend a lot of time in the air, which is where you walk. I think but they did get safer, and they got safer. Yeah. Well before we had the kind of comprehensive safety regulations that now exist. The same is true for automobiles. We've only had comprehensive federal auto safety regulation for 50 years. Yeah. And before NHTSA, I think that there's an argument to be made that NHTSA did improve safety by focusing automakers on making safer cars, but fatalities and crashes were falling before NHTSA existed. So
Ralph Nader came in there and stirred the pot a little bit at the beginning of that too, on safety.
Well, his advocacy, it's what resulted in the creation of.
Yeah, right. I mean, he's.
We could call it Nader instead of NHTSA.
He's class of '55, so we love Ralph.
He's been on with us. He's been on with us. Yeah. So Mark, let me ask you this: what is at the heart of what you would like to see accomplished? It seems like you want states to more or less be out of the way. You want the innovation to take place, companies to be able to move ahead, but at the same time, there needs to be some kind of regulation.
I think we're going to have regulation. Whether I would prefer that or not, I don't think is that's my personal opinions on how to dream up the best government regime just aren't going to come to pass. So I think we're stuck with the system we have. That said, I think we can do things intelligently and with data and information and act when that data and information comes in. But I think what's scary for a lot of policymakers is that we don't have that information, but they want to act. So trying to tell them that, maybe it's wait and see stage right now. Like I said, it's often an unsatisfying answer, but I think that that's the best approach at this stage. Until we have more information to competently regulate this, I think by and large, we shouldn't be regulating it in any sort of new ways. I think we have, I think basic compliance with existing federal motor vehicle safety standards is, that's going to happen. We still have rules of the road that these things have to abide by. Focus on that. Focus on modernizing those authorities. So that we can take a more tailored approach to these vehicles in the future. But I just don't think we're at the phase yet where we can start engaging in sort of, rulemaking after rulemaking on technical matters. Because, like we talked about, the technical standards to have that you need to have these kinds of discussions don't exist in most places. So we need that first. We really need technical standards, standardized test procedures, and that's going to come out of the consensus standards bodies like SAE and IEEE and folks like that. And a lot of these developers, to their credit, are on those committees. They're working on those standards, but we really want those private standards first before we start really getting into this with policymaking.
I want to jump on your modernizing the rules of the road, because I think that is a really important thing to do. The rules of the road were developed because humans were in the loop, following or adhering as well or as poorly as they can to those rules of the road. So I like to argue, at least to my students, to say that we've made some of these rules such that we're assuming that because humans are following them, they might not do it quite so well all the time, okay? They'll give you 9 miles an hour over the speed limit. The speed limit is not a speed limit. It's or at least I don't think it is. I don't think any police officer, any jurisdiction really thinks, even though they might have signs, we strictly go to a speed limit. I mean, that's just not the way, or maybe it is, or maybe it isn't, but there's a gray area in that. once we start dealing with algorithms doing this as opposed to people doing it, man, when we write those things, when we write the code, beam, I mean, we have that gazillion decimal places, boom, we nail it. You tell us, you when we write that, you say we can't do this, boom, there's a cap. Those two don't mix well. So in some sense, the rules of the road, I think, should really reflect who are the rules of the road targeting. They're targeting people who are going to execute the functions, the working elements of it. Then they're one thing. If they're going to be algorithms, they really do need to be something else. Because if we then say, oh, no, yep, it is 55, boom, everybody. I mean, that is not a good situation to put out there. Why? Because it's not good for safety. It's not good for mobility. It might be good for the environment, maybe, but maybe not. And so, how do we address that sucker? And then the sort of part of that sort of ends up getting me thinking that, these things are really a new mode. They certainly are as different from an automobile as a motorcycle is different from an automobile. They may be as different from an automobile as a pipeline is different from an automobile. Maybe not so much pipeline infrastructure, but besides using the surface road, the surface infrastructure, pretty much the rules and the paint that's on there and a couple of signs, the rest of it is different. And to put asterisks on all the things that we put on that have to do with something that we're going to do this, as opposed to an algorithm coming up D, probably requires a different mindset, different things, and asterisks on those old rules. What do you talk to me here?
I think that raises a very interesting point, because I think right now it may make sense to exempt these vehicles from certain existing rules. That's easy. Yeah. But like you said, having an asterisk after everything is not how you should be going about this. So I think fundamentally the rules need to be rewritten at some point in the future to take into account both types of road users, if they're driving a conventional vehicle, or if they're riding in one of these, or if there's no occupants. And that's, and that gets the other thing. Should we be treating something like Neuro, these little lightweight vehicles that don't have occupants, should they be subject to the crashworthiness requirements at NHTSA that are designed to protect the occupants? And I would say no. I mean, obviously we shouldn't be weighing down these vehicles more to make them more deadly to pedestrians to protect a non-existent occupant.
Yeah, especially, part of that, make sure that the steering column doesn't go through your chest.
Exactly.
There is no steering column.
In the state codes, they reference, so NHTSA has these, they're supposed to be minimum performance regulations. Yeah. The states often just say, you need to have this. And they kind of say, here's an element from NHTSA's Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. You got to require this. So there are things like we shouldn't have requirements for steering columns, which exist all over the country in state motor vehicle code. And all sorts of devices that don't really apply to these future settings.
Rear view mirror. Now that we have camera,
exactly.
I mean, we got rear. I mean, but kidding me? I got big screen. That's why I think, damn it, let's just create a new entity, bring in new people who have the expertise, who don't have that back. I don't want to call it back. Knowledge is good. I don't want to call it baggage. Edit that out, Fred. But
you just did.
Yeah, I just did. But really, it's, as you said, doing it with asterisks is not.
That's not a long-term solution. I mean, you can make the argument for the short term, but you've got to say it. Okay, we're doing this until we can figure out to do a more permanent fix, and maybe that requires a new entity. Maybe NHTSA can figure this out. I'm actually on some of the Series 200 or the 200 series FMVSS occupant protection stuff. that seems to be a priority right now at the agency, and we'll see when the final rule comes out if they actually do a good job. But you know, we also we're going to be waiting, you know, 8-10 years for each of these things to go through. That's a long time, and if they mess it up, they got to go back and probably spend just as much time. So yeah, I mean, the status quo regulatory environment is not built.
And in the interim, Silicon Valley is going nuts because they're operating at least at 10, if not 100x speed. Whatever. Yeah.
Well, we want to encourage people to go to reason.org to get more info on Marc's writing and everything else that's there. We'll be back with more, but first we want to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, look for the white paper titled The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under a tab called Insights and News. You can find a lot of information there to help you make informed decisions. ETFs, as you may know, can be a smart way to spread your risk in investing and focus on a particular category. The site, once again, is motoetf.com. Alan, in the latest Smart Driving Car newsletter, you highlight a proposal for a new UN regulation pertaining to automated lane keeping systems.
Yeah, I think this is an effort, and I thank Russ Shields for pointing it out to me. I missed it when it came out, but they're working hard trying to do a UN regulation that focuses on the beginnings of so-called level 3. It really is limited to I think 60 kilometers per hour type of thing. It is sort of a traffic jam assist kind of thing, but it tries to deal with the very simple, fundamental aspect of allowing the individual to not be paying attention when this system is on, which is sort of fundamental to just that piece of it. Part of the trip while you're in a congestion area, going slowly, ability to turn such a system on and then remain available once the system then says, hey, I'm not having trouble doing this, take over, the availability to take over, but an explicit permission to allow you to, what we all want to do, I think, is text, where's my phone? Instead of in certain times. This is and they're, I guess, struggling to put that out. There's a very detailed compilation. It sort of fits in with what Marc is talking about. But, these are even in just that simple lane keeping, don't hit the thing in front of you, and do it only in places where you don't have bicyclists and pedestrians, trying to get the whole darn thing started. And as I also like to say, we're still at 0 degrees Kelvin, or maybe we're at epsilon degrees Kelvin. We're not at 0, we're just at t. But we're at the very beginning of this. There's been a lot of talk. There's been a lot of publicity. There are some things out there in some vehicles that some people, Elon, who's that? Elon likes to tout and so on. So it's gotten a lot of press, but we're still at the very beginning.
Any thoughts about it, Marc?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good that they're thinking about this seriously. I mean, I still think there's a lot of questions about that. What happens when it tells you to take back control, the handoff? Even, I think, but if you keep it only on like a limited access highway where you don't have the other kind of vulnerable road users that you do have on surface streets, that can mitigate some of that risk. But some of the simulator tests that came out of how long is it going to take to get someone back on task and stabilize steering after handoff, it doesn't look great if there is a hazard immediately ahead of you.
Yeah, certainly at speed. For years I've said, if all of a sudden this thing tells me to go out and grab the wheel, what am I going to do? I'm going to turn the wheel, and I'm going to flip the car, and I'm going to die. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to overreact. I overreact to everything. I guess that's a common fault. But it's sitting there, and it's a really tough thing. So certainly, speed is the killer here. The attempt here, I think, is to get the regulation so you can do it at low speeds. Low speeds, you have the opportunity of time, and the dynamics aren't as bad. And of course, to me, all these systems, I like to say, you know, I run, and when I run on the roadway, I'm always looking at the traffic coming at me, and I'm making sure I have a bailout route in case they're coming at me all the time. I mean, these systems have to be designed that way, that they always have a bailout. They have the opportunity to move over to the shoulder or something like that, or at least the opportunity to stop in time and back up traffic. Too bad, you know. I mean, at least things don't go boom. But the idea has to be they don't go boom. Okay, they don't go boom. That's where you get to me, the real value in safety and everything else, and maybe we can get there. But yeah, we all want to do this, I think. Yeah.
Alan, moving on through the newsletter, I think California's Governor Gavin Newsom created a little bit of a boom, as you would say.
He created a boom.
Signing an executive order to phase out the sale of new gasoline cars, or really ban them by 2035.
So, Mark, you know, I guess that I am so out of it. I didn't even see it coming. I didn't even know it was, you know, anybody was really even, you know. So, what, Mark? Did you see that coming, or or maybe you guys are all whatever? I don't know.
I didn't see it coming, and you know, in looking at it a little bit, it doesn't seem to. It's unclear what authority they have to do that in the first place. But if
California has done a lot on its own in the past when it comes
to and much of it they got somewhat, but yeah,
which they a lot of the stuff they've done has been under a waiver from the EPA, which is allow them to have more stringent tailpipe standards. I mean, this is talking about banning the sale of, I mean, that's a whole
of new. I mean, oh man, I'm going to buy up every 55 Chevy I can find and then go out there and sell those suckers.
Well, yeah, you set up.
Although I'm not going to live till 30.
That dealership in Nevada on the other side of the border.
Or open up the dealership. Oh yeah, and buy a home there, and the hell with you guys. And I don't know what they're going to do. Check your license plate. I guess it's out there for us to discuss. It's out there for us. What seems to although be happening with the electric vehicle, though, is my view on it in the past has been we haven't made any advances in batteries, even though, you know, Apple spent how much money trying to make advances in batteries, because what's the technological limitation of these things? It's the battery. Okay, when you get right down to it, that's why it weighs so much. That's why whatever, and but we may be on the verge of really getting batteries with enough density, with enough, you know, cycles in them, with a cost that is, you know, certainly not Moore's law, but improving. And if it does, you know, electric vehicles might end up being, you know, the vehicle of choice.
Well, Elon did have his battery day this week, talking about new technology, and promised a $25,000 Tesla in 3 years.
Yeah, well, he has he hit the $35,000 Tesla that I put?
He's a couple thousand off, I think.
That I put my $1,000 down on. I don't know how many years ago that I had to have one. I still don't have one. Whatever, they still have my 1,000. I don't know. I mean, at some point. Yeah. With Elon, you got to take a few things with a grain of salt. Maybe with the governor of California, you have to take things with a few grains of salt. That's fine. The concept is interesting. The marketplace may end up doing it, or doing it in a large part. It may just end up, you know, no transmission, no whatever. The thing goes puts you back on your seat. If you have the range, if you don't have the range, anxiety and
I think the new Model S he talked about, what is it, 500-mile range?
yeah, whatever. So you get 150. Okay, you got a discount. You got or my risk aversion brain discounts everything. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, one other thing with Tesla this week, they had a complete network outage that really made some headlines, knocking out connectivity features. I guess a lot of people might take a step back and say,
Yeah,
"Uh-oh."
so did Google. So
Yeah,
did Google.
sure.
Google went down and so on. So, it's amazing that we haven't had more of these things. I mean, how much bandwidth are we using out there to do this on Zoom, to not be able to get together and to do all this schooling and education and whatever? I mean, I don't know where the hell's that all. At some point, one of those, some wire has scopes, and and I don't know. It doesn't look like it's terrorism. Okay, I mean, at least the Russians haven't told me that yet, so I don't know. Mark.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that, but we've heard a lot in recent years about some more government-directed connectivity, DSRC, and I think the solution is they can just mandate that it never goes down. That's the solution. You have the.
I'd like that at my house. I'd like it
Sure,
mandated
man.
that my internet.
You got to know the right people.
Anybody who can ever do a never and always for me, I'm all for. Okay, I've never been able to do a never, and I've never been able to do an always. And yeah, sure. Talk to me here. Yeah, and what happened? I guess I can't say what happens when they don't. Yeah. But I guess.
But if we were, but I mean, it does raise, interesting questions. What if we have? I mean, if in the future we're in a world where we have safety critical systems that rely on constant connectivity. I mean, presumably they would build in some kind of fail safe in the event of this happens. But if we, that's what I thought of when I heard this. It's like if we put too many eggs in the connectivity basket, I mean, we're kind of setting ourselves up.
Yeah, of course we are. I mean, that's
when a solar flare comes along and says, "Ha ha ha."
Yeah, that's why I've never been a fan of the whole connectivity thing. I mean, I want to be able to do it by myself. To me, this was the elegance of the DARPA challenge. We finally started this. It was at least came to realization, my goodness, we have an opportunity to put enough intelligence in each of these vehicles so that they can do it themselves, and at least do it themselves. And hey, that's the way I've lived my life. I guess that's how risk averse I am. I've always wanted to, hey, if I have to walk, my legs better be strong enough. I'm going to walk it. The hell with it, and to say, oh no, I've got to have all this support, all this other stuff around me, whatever. Otherwise, I shrivel up and die. It's a hell of a position to put us all into.
Okay. Well, a couple more headlines to get to from the newsletter, Alan. The U.S. Labor Department this week announced a proposal that could put gig workers, including those Uber and Lyft drivers, in the category of contractors rather than employees. I don't think it has the force of law, though, and it really goes against the moves in California.
Yeah. I mean, this is a very difficult issue with respect to gig workers and so on, or independents. I think it's been marvelous. I tell my students that and said, the App Store was really, to me, the really first good environment to support a gig worker. It allowed some of my students to sit in their parents' basements and write code. And have somebody else take care of the marketing, the sales, the distribution, to do all the other things you have to do to actually run a business. Man, I'm just good at writing code. I can do it 2 a.m., 4 a.m. And I always thought Apple did a damn good job. They only took 30%. I mean, you know, you look at trying to put something in some shelf in some store, which I tried to do at one point in my life. Holy hell, what you have to pay to do that. So I thought they supported the gig workers in some sense. You know, Uber and Lyft gave employment to a lot of people who otherwise and made their life better as workers. So somehow that has to be done. But also those folks were also taken advantage of, okay? When you actually looked at the bottom line, how much did they earn? Man, it was embarrassing. You know, it might be, you know, they were almost enslaved. And so, you know, that's a typical labor thing. You know, management takes advantage of labor. Labor comes back and swings the pendulum and says, "We're organized, and you have to give us that." And, you know, it's tough. Mark, from the Reason Foundation, you guys must, you know, I mean, this involves labor and labor organization and independence and all those things, you know, are kind of fundamentals. It's a tough question.
Well, I mean, I think shoehorning every, you know, Uber, I mean, this was the California law. I mean, they covered a bunch of people and they keep on giving out, you know, exemptions like candy. But it was aimed at, you know, Uber and Lyft drivers, but you know, a lot of those drivers, they have no intention of it being their full-time job. They want to pick up a few hours here and there at the peak periods, and they don't want benefits. Their full-time job already gives them benefits. They want cash. So I think, you know, shoehorning people into, you know, this, I mean, I'm sure there's got to be a better way to do it than what California did that still gives people the flexibility when you can also still have some protections that folks want.
One of the fundamental problems with public transit is that public transit has peaks morning and evening, and that's where when you need the workers, but people don't want to work necessarily, or not enough want to work morning and evenings according to that schedule. They like to work 8 hours or whatever it is. So therefore, my goodness, you got to keep them around in the valley, and that's expensive. But and so they've organized and they have their unions and they fight for it. And of course, that's where they're at. But guess what? You know, it makes the economics of that whole operation not as good as it could be, simply because of the productivity over the time span. So here comes Uber and Lyft, and they find the people who want to work in that. That's beautiful. Does it scale beyond 1% of the trips? I've argued it doesn't scale, because at some point you don't have enough people who want to do just that piece. So that's why I argue, you know, all that additional stuff to do the next percent, and the next 10%, and the next 20%. Do it with a gizmo, with a machine. Doesn't care when it works. Okay. And provide the mobility, and everybody's somewhat happy. But you know, it's tough concept either way, and Labor Department jumped in. Yeah, we're going to be discussing this for a while.
Discussing Nikola for a while too now. The founder stepping down as executive chairman amid the fraud charges. Pretty fast fall, and you wonder aloud in the newsletter, Alan, if the GM deal is going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, there must, in any deal, you know, I mean, if you're any kind of lawyer, you put in there, if the market shifts or something or whatever, you can get out. Okay, this is a market shift on this thing. You know, and the surprising thing is that basically the person that I think sold GM was a former GM executive who's on the board of Nikola, who's now its CEO. And, you know, he didn't know it, or was it really? It's really unfortunate. I mean, it's tough enough in this business if we don't lie, cheat, and steal. Oh my goodness, if we're lying, cheating, and stealing when we're trying to do this, I mean, you know, the hell with it, okay? I mean, seriously.
And I'm going to throw an allegedly in there for you too.
Huh? Pardon me?
I'm going to throw an allegedly in there for you.
Yeah, please do. Please do. I'll get myself in all kinds of trouble. But seriously, I mean, there's, if we can't be honest about this, if we can't be totally forthright, let's do something else.
GM has another headline. They've revealed some new details on their Ultium battery platform for electric vehicles. We were talking about batteries before and the need, and I guess they're putting a lot of work into this too.
They're putting work. Yeah, they're putting work into it. I think I guess Tesla and Wall Street sort of kind of certainly is up the ante on all this. So out of that, maybe something will come out, although people have been working on trying to improve batteries since 1837, if not before. Okay, the concept of a battery, I mean, it's almost perpetual motion. You put energy in, you take it out, you put energy in, it goes by itself. And there are losses, unfortunately, in the process that end up killing you. But if you can make that darn thing efficient, man, I mean, some very fundamental aspects come to play. And told my students recently, if you take us back to 1905 or something like that, you didn't know which propulsion system was going to win. Was it going to be steam? Steam had been so successful in locomotives and ships and mobile energy and so on, or was it going to be electricity with electric motors and whatever, or was it going to be autos and internal combustion engine? Those three were neck and neck basically in 1905-ish. Two of them fell by the wayside, and one of them went. It's kind of interesting. You'd say, well, hey, steam's going to go. The pressure thing is going to get you because the weight is going to get you.
Well, I think there weren't advocates for electric vehicles back then almost.
Oh, yeah, no. Oh, absolutely. They had electric motor. I actually, probably if we were sitting in 1905 and we're chatting here, we'd probably, all three of us would say, yeah, electricity is going to win. 1905, electricity was on that. You had Westinghouse and Edison, and Tesla and all these guys out there pushing electricity.
We electrified the streetcars, the trolleys.
The trolleys. I mean, they did that in 1888, 90, whatever. Whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, stuff was being built. People were buying it. It was successful in the marketplace. I mean, they were doing podcasts on Zoom at the time on it.
and then the oil lobby got involved.
and then who knows? I mean, it's kind of surprising that, in fact, the internal combustion engine made it because of all the parts and the stuff that you had to do with it. And the torque curve isn't really all that great. And it could come back, I mean, folks are working on trying to make that, much more efficient, much more lighter weight, fewer parts, cheaper, but man, electricity is, it's almost a turn. Sales are what? They're still in the single digits, if even above 5, I don't think, or maybe 8 max in California or something like that. So, but they are off the ground and seem to have some amount of momentum. The second derivative and third derivative of that sucker are pretty big.
Well, all the car makers are sure getting on board here. It seems.
It seems like it.
Finally, in what you call the Sunday supplement section of the newsletter,
what did I put in there?
Is the headline from Car Buzz: Mercedes-Benz winning the race to level 3 autonomy.
Yeah, no, that's the talk of it. That's the talk of it. The problem is they call it level 3. What we talked about earlier. I guess it is level 3, but it's not the concept of level 3 that had been put out there. The public, anybody who thinks about it says, I'm going to go out and buy a car in a dealer, I'll drive it through my neighborhood, get on I-95, and I'll hit that sucker, and I'll go, put it at 9 over the speed limit, and bam, I can. And
But the headline is that you're right, Alan. It's a great illustration of why we need something other than SAE levels to talk about automation.
Yeah, we really, it gets back to we really do, Mark, and I don't know, I think we have to continue to work on it. It was nice that they put it together. It's good for the engineers or whatever. I don't think it reflects the business cases, and I don't think it reflects the value cases and the value propositions that are offered by the technology. And maybe it talks about the challenges, but not the value. And in the end, if it's going to be something that's other than going up on a shelf as a report, that it has to be consumed by individuals, it's going to have to deliver value. I mean, otherwise, the government has to buy it for me. Will the government buy it for me, Mark?
Well, I guess they would say you guys just aren't level-headed. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, it wouldn't be the first person to say that about me.
Hey, Mark,
Anyway.
we really appreciate you taking the time with us today. Great
We really
insights.
do.
Oh, it's great being on. Thank you for having me. It was a blast.
Thanks, Mark. We'll do it again, okay? And thank you for your report, and keep up the good work, huh?
And the website, once again, is reason.org. It focuses on libertarian principles in a range of areas. Thanks to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more information is available at motoetf.com. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts from. And you can get your smart speaker to play us too. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alain Kornhauser. Thank you for taking the time to listen or watch, and please stay safe.